the Legal Corner podcast series. Welcome to today's episode of The Legal Corner, a podcast which covers a variety of legal issues to keep you informed. Hosted by attorney at law Colvin Blaize and communications specialist Leonardo Torres.
Thank you so much for joining us on this our first episode of the Legal Corner podcast series. I am your host, Colvin Blaize, attorney at law, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Mr. Leonardo Torres. Good afternoon to you, Leonardo.
Good afternoon, Mr. Dinoon, and also good afternoon to Mr. Blaize. I am Leonardo Torres, communications specialist. Very, very excited to be on our first episode and, of course, to have Mr. Blaize here with us.
Of course, and we have our illustrious guest, Mr. Colvin Blaize, who is no stranger to myself. He's a senior attorney at law. Mr. Blaize is the principal attorney of Colvin, C.E. Blaize and Company, and he has been called to the bar in excess of 20 years. Mr. Blaize is also a licensed surveyor, and today we will be looking at the topic of the contract of employment and mandatory COVID-19 vaccination. How are you doing today, Mr. Blaize, and welcome to Legal Corner.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Colin. I am fine, fully vaccinated, and beyond that issue.
Mr. Blaize, you know, it's always a pleasure connecting.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure connecting with you, sir, and I know that you would add richly to this discussion from your wealth of knowledge. So we're going to get right into it. Just to put things in perspective, we are currently in the throes of a pandemic. It continues unabated in many countries. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have had a bit of a seesaw experience whereby we would have had hard lockdowns, and also we have had opportunities where it seemed as though the worst days were behind us. Vaccination has also introduced a new dynamic where some persons have availed themselves of the opportunity to be vaccinated, while in case of other persons, they have expressed vaccine hesitancy. And no other place has this whole question of vaccination become more relevant than the workplace and the relationship between employers and employees. Now, as we all know, there are certain statutory regimes that govern employment in Trinidad and Tobago, right? And govern the relationship between employers and employees. And oftentimes, this relationship is governed by a contract of employment. So, Mr. Blaize, I'd like to ask you, in your words, how would you describe a contract of employment?
Well, certainly the contract of employment between employer and employee dictates the relationship and the expectation, both an employer and employee, with respect to two parties within a workplace. So, in the absence of course, in the absence of the contract of employment, then you're guided to a large extent by what is contained within the Industrial Relations Act,
right,
and how that relationship between employer and employee should play out. The contract now, there are certain aspects of that you can contract out on if you wish, that forms a contract of employment and details the relationship between the employer and the employee. What their wages are, the hours of work, how disciplinary matters are to be dealt with, the ability of the employer to not just discipline, but to terminate the employee's employment. All of that is contained within your contract of employment. Like I said, in the absence of that, then there is the provisions in the Industrial Relations Act that sets a baseline as to what the relationship of employer-employee should be like going forward.
Blaize, now, as you would have mentioned, the incident or the issue rather of the Industrial Relations Act, is it that whereby it's an act where if there's a breach between those terms that you would have mentioned between the relationship between the employer and the employee, is that whereby now the employees now would look at the act, or the attorney, of course, and see if any shortcomings would be there, and then that's where then they could bring forward a legal action if it's justified?
Yeah, I mean, in the normal course of things, the law expects a particular relationship between the employer and employee. That's why, to a large extent, that relationship, the law concerning it and the monitoring of it, has a forum of its own in the industrial court. And it's not in the normal court of law where you deal, if anything, for the most part, with contract. So if there is some, as you would put it, breach with respect to the relationship between the employer and employee, and it normally works with the employee that is aggrieved, and they may have a union representative or be part of a union or be within a union in which they have been adjudged to be an employee in good standing, then they can have the union represent them against the employer with respect to any particular grievance that they may have. And the particular forum, what it normally starts, they normally require that there is negotiation between the union and the employer. If that breaks down, it then goes to the Ministry of Labor. Once that breaks down, it then goes to the industrial court. And even when you're in the industrial court normally would recommend that the first stage conciliation proceedings. So you have the parties go before a conciliator and they still try to trash out their issues. And only when that fails, again, that it then goes before the full panel of the industrial court to make a decision.
So
there's a step-by-step process, and each step they try to see if the parties could actually come to some form of a resolution before it actually goes full legal before the panel of the industrial court.
So as we are talking about the Industrial Relations Act, Mr. Blaize, and the whole question of the industrial court, does the Industrial Relations Act apply to workers who are not unionized, or is it only for persons who are represented by a union?
No. The Industrial Relations Act applies with respect to the issue of relationship of employer-employee. With respect to your ability to get representation, it's normally the first instance the union. And the union, from the standpoint of negotiation, from the standpoint of advocating on behalf of the employee, that is the appropriate route to follow with respect to, at least in the industrial court. Now, even in the industrial court, even if you have the ability of the union or the facility of the union to act on your behalf, you can still choose to get an attorney to represent you. Right? Because that option is there as well. Because we're doing a matter right now where it started off in the union, and the person said, you know what, no, I want to get an attorney to represent me rather than a union representative. So the person actually had an attorney representing them before the industrial court with respect to the industrial matter. So it shouldn't be, one, the first port of call is normally the union with respect to the representation, for sure. But two, with respect to the general principles governing the employer-employee relationship, the Industrial Relations Act certainly lays down a blueprint as to how that should be conducted.
Okay.
Now, if you have a contract, that has to go before the High Court. You don't know if it's a breach of contract, or the contract was breached or not. You go before the High Court and you argue that aspect of it. But outside of that, once it's an employee-employer type relationship, and the organization is unionized, even if it's not unionized, it doesn't mean that the employee can't be a member of a union. So you can have a business, it's not unionized, but the employee is a member of a union. Should any type of industrial relation arise, they then get that relevant representation.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr.
Okay.
Blaize. Leonardo, I know you wanted to jump in.
So I'm glad you made that distinction in terms of the employee, which I guess we are referring to somebody who is, would say, maybe permanent or temporary or a casual worker or something to that extent, versus somebody who is on a contract. So that goes to the High Court as opposed to the industrial court.
Yeah, all right. So there's a difference between an employee and an independent contractor, totally. Yeah.
Right.
So an independent contractor is an entity all by itself.
Right.
All right. Whereas an employee is part and parcel of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the employer is the one who will pay they retain their taxes to pay their NIS and their BRR. They have that responsibility. An independent contractor, I pay you, and you handle your own NIS, BIR, all those relevant payments. And the obligations that one to the next is totally different. Employer-employee obligation is entirely separating from a client, subcontractor, independent contractor type relationship. So two entirely different things.
Right.
Okay.
Jumping on that, Mr. Blaize, there are many persons who are employed in the informal sector. All right. And one of the things we want to know is kind of
informal sector.
Well, in terms of persons who may not always be employed under a written contract of employment. So we wanted to know, can a contract of employment be oral? Can an oral agreement give rise to a contract of employment?
Of course. I mean that happens all the time. Somebody comes, they say, oh, here, and I want you to do X, Y, and Z. They come in, and that happens a lot. That is why we have the Industrial Relations Act. So in the absence of some written contract, there is still legislation that guides the relationship that should occur, that happen between the employer and employee.
Okay.
So there's always some legal basis.
Right.
That governs the relationship. Well, catch-all if you want to call it that, but that's why it was there, specifically to deal with situations where I just say, hey, come on, there is no contract. You just come, you're working. It doesn't mean that we have no contract. There are no rules that govern how we operate.
All right. Now, I have a question as it pertains to the responsibilities. I know we would have touched on the fact that a contract of employment really speaks to the relationship between the employer and the employee. But what I wanted to know, what are some of the responsibilities of an employer to their employee?
In what regard?
Well, in terms of, we could talk about things like duty of care, right? And I guess from there we could probably have a conversation now in terms of what is the duty of care that an employer owes to an employee. Right? And if there are other responsibilities.
Right. So again, broadly speaking, an employer with respect to the issue of an employee, from an administrative standpoint, has certain responsibilities: responsibility to train, responsibility to guide, responsibility to provide a work environment for escalation. Or we could be speaking about the issue of the workplace itself and safety, in which we have actual legislation that governs that, which is the OSHA's Act. And the OSHA's Act would spell out in detail what are the responsibility or the general duties with respect to the employer to the employee as it deals with the issue of a safe, healthy workplace with respect to the employee. So anytime we're speaking of that, certainly where we go to is the OSHA's Act, and I believe it's Section 6.
Okay.
6, 7, 8, those sections that deal in a degree of detail with respect to exactly what are the responsibilities, employer-employee, employee-employer, and working in that particular environment. So there's legislation that treats with that as well.
So what you were spelling out there for us is that as it pertains to the OSHA Act, that spells out the responsibilities, right?
Correct.
That the employer has to the employee, right?
With respect to the issue of the environment.
A safe working place.
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Blaize, what you would say, I know you would have discussed the duties that an employer owes an employee, but does an employee owe an employer any duties at all at law?
I mean, certainly he owes the duty to come and do the employer's work. I mean, certainly there's a big duty of care relative to that. Because at the end of the day, it rebounds to everybody, because the employee doesn't work to the level that is required by the company. Then the company suffers. They're unable to employ, then the employee ultimately suffers.
Yeah.
So one, the employer has an obligation to say, I need to provide you with a safe, comfortable workplace. I need to provide you with the relevant management oversight to ensure that we get the best of the employee. But the employee themselves, they have an obligation to give their best to the employer relative to what is required with respect to the job and the work that has been given to them. So certainly, yes, that responsibility is both ways.
So it's a two-way street. It's not only that the employers are obligated to employees, but employees are also obligated.
It's not just, of course, and not just I say about two-way street. I like to view it more as a partnership.
Okay.
In that we come together to work to achieve a particular objective at the end of the day.
Right.
One can't work without the other.
Of course.
All right. So it's a partnership, and the employer-employee hopefully should both feel that way and feel motivated with respect to the issue of trying to achieve a particular objective at the end of the day.
Right.
Now, we're going to kind of change gears a bit as it pertains to this type of relationship that we have been talking about between the employer and the employee, right? I mean, you would have spelled out responsibilities the employee has, the responsibilities the employer has. We have also talked about certain things in terms of courses of action, courts, as it pertains to where you go to if you're a contractor versus an employee. Now, we're dealing with mandatory COVID-19 vaccinations, and it is a bit of a topical issue in Trinidad. We've been seeing it throughout the length and breadth in various sectors of the workplace, different types of industries as well. You're seeing it all over, and even internationally as well. Let me ask a very straight and direct question. Can employees be mandated to be vaccinated?
Present employees, no. New employees, yes. So let me explain.
All right.
Employees that are in a present employer-employee relationship, they would have had certain rules or contracts or relationship, as the case may be, that has already been established via either a social or a legal contract. One party cannot unilaterally change that, and the industrial court has been very clear on that. So if once we're dealing with an existing employee, if any issue of there being any form of vaccination, it must form the subject matter of some form of collective bargaining. Parties must come together and agree. The employer, however, in employing new staff,
right,
or bringing on new employees, can make it a prerequisite of employment that you must be vaccinated.
Right.
That we can do, because now we are at the stage and the genesis of the contract where we are agreeing on the terms. And if one of those terms that we are agreeing on is that you must be vaccinated, that now becomes part of that contract between the parties.
Understood.
But with respect to existing employees that before COVID and I never agreed to be vaccinated, if we are going to be vaccinated now, it must form the subject matter of a collective bargaining. We can't have mandatory vaccination for existing employees.
Right, it cannot be mandated. So there must be, as you said, collective bargaining. But can you touch briefly on what really is that collective bargaining? Is it that they have to go to the union who would have represent those workers and try and get that conversation going? Would it have to be some form of enticement? Or how do you really get somebody to do something like that within that collective bargaining process?
Well, like I said, if it's unionized, you need to go by the union. If you're not, and you have conversations with your employee with respect to the issue of we are looking to change the terms of our engagement, of the contract that we had initially.
Right.
Let's have a conversation. Now, how they have gotten around that to a certain extent, they say, hey, vaccine not mandatory. You know? You have either option A, get vaccinated, or option B, spend your money and bring your PCR test every week.
Yeah.
All right, that every week, so PCR test every week, as the case may be.
Yeah.
So that is how they have said no, it's not mandatory. You have either option A or B. You decide what you want to do.
Yeah.
But you see, since you have made mention of that, because I too have heard of that option for those who are unvaccinated. But is it also fair to say that a negative PCR test every 2 weeks, so whatever they decide is the stipulated timeline for this? If that was not initially, of course, agreed on before, and I'm now being told by my employer that I am requiring to have this PCR test every 2 weeks, are they breaking the law? Is it a breach of contract?
Well, you have to be careful how we say that, because one of the things you ask is what is the responsibility of the employer relative to the employee?
Right.
All right. The other question that follows from that is what the responsibility of the employer relative to the employees.
Right.
So we can't necessarily speak of the rights of an employee separate and apart from the employees. So if the employer says, listen to me, I have an obligation to be able to provide my employees with a safe workplace, then if there's an isolated case or isolated cases that affects that safe workplace, I need to be able to come with a solution. And if the solution is not to make vaccines mandatory, then certainly it should be another scenario that allows me to be able to filter out persons that may enter into the environment to affect the health of my employee.
Now, I just want to jump in here because Mr. Blaize, what crosses my mind as you talk about, okay, they can say that new employees need to be vaccinated. Someone may ask the question, what about discrimination? Is an employer discriminating against persons who choose not to be vaccinated? How would you respond to that?
No, but when you say discrimination, what do you mean? What sanction is being, because I asked that you take a PCR test, is that the discrimination you're speaking of?
No, the discrimination is,
because that's the only discrimination that
yeah, but it could be argued for specifying that someone must be fully vaccinated before being employed. Someone could argue that you are discriminating against me if I choose not to be vaccinated and you do not want to hire me. Would you say that is discrimination?
No, why would I say that is discrimination? This is the employer has the right or the obligation to provide a safe workplace for his employee.
Right.
If, as part of fulfilling that obligation, he believes that the person that is entering the workplace needs to be vaccinated, then he has the obligation or the right to do that.
Okay. I'm happy that you would have said, in terms of the employer is giving the employees that option so that they don't breach the contract. You said, okay, you don't want to be vaccinated because it's not mandatory. Then you work with your PCR test. And I guess they can be backed in terms of law with the OSHA Act in terms of providing a safe space.
Correct.
Right? So I got that. And to me, it makes logical sense now, and I could understand why at this point I haven't heard of any cases in the courts, in the industrial court, of these things. I don't know if there's anything that's happening behind the scenes. I'm not sure. Maybe you could say.
Yeah. No. The only issue that will have arisen is the issue of making it mandatory, and that has already been dispelled.
Right.
I don't think anybody is pursuing any particular route of making it mandatory, especially respect to the issue of existing employee. No one is pursuing that at all.
All right. So as we continue along this topic of COVID-19 and vaccinations and whatnot, we are all aware, I'm sure you are, Mr. Blaize, as you said, that you are fully vaccinated. So you would understand what that would mean for you in terms of where you can go. So, of course, I'm referring to safe zones, right? Do you think it is a wise policy to have safe zones for vaccinated persons?
Well, I am still trying to figure out what is a safe zone.
Well, I mean, what they have indicated is that within that safe zone, you would have only vaccinated people, right?
Yeah, but what is safe about it? If the vaccine does not prevent you from getting COVID,
Right.
if the vaccine is not a cure,
Right.
if the vaccine just merely, as they would put it, reduces your risk of being hospitalized, then what is a safe zone?
So I'm
Because,
guessing. Go
because
ahead.
as far as I'm concerned, if we all vaccinated, there's nothing in that statement that says that I can't get infected with COVID.
Right, yeah, you are correct.
So what is a safe zone? What is a safe zone?
So I'm getting it. You're making it pellucidly clear here that it is not a wise policy to have a safe zone.
Well, if you could advise me what a safe zone means, then I better be able to answer that.
Well, what I could stick up in and say that from what has been articulated in the media in terms of the press conferences and whatnot, what they are attempting to do, and you could give me your opinion on this, they are saying that within this safe zone, these spaces, right, when you have people coming into those spaces who are unvaccinated, and in the event that they do catch the virus, that it creates havoc within a system whereby they would have had no protection, so that they could end up seriously ill, ICU, HDU.
Right, for the persons who are unvaccinated. Right?
Correct.
Right. But it doesn't affect anyone who is actually vaccinated. So when you keep only vaccinated persons in a space, that is a safe zone for
vaccinated.
Well, how could it be a safe zone for vaccinated? They could still get COVID.
Right.
Best case scenario might be a safe zone for the unvaccinated because you can come here. So you have vaccinated people all in a space, and that is a safe zone for whom? Because you can still get COVID because the vaccine does not prevent you from getting COVID. You can still get the COVID. As a matter of fact, you have a bigger chance of getting COVID because people come in there, you're not really checking them for COVID because they're fully vaccinated. But it doesn't mean they don't have COVID.
Yeah, that's correct.
I think
so like I said, I'm still trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, to me, I think the safe zone was sort of a middle of the road approach. In terms, instead of having all these businesses closed for such an extended period of time, they were able to have a middle ground approach to say, well, yeah, what up? You all can open, have your social distancing and so on, but only for fully vaccinated people. So I suppose it was just a compromise between the business community and the state.
And I have no difficulty here. From the business community standpoint, I mean, I'm business as well.
Of course.
I just want to see this place up and running.
Yeah.
And if everybody had to get vaccinated, regardless of whatever that means, so that the place can get up and running, as a business person, you're saying, hey, yeah, I am supporting that idea. All right? But I think it's important that we have an honest and straightforward conversation about really what is happening. And I think that is what is causing the problem. So there are people who are, like I said, I'm fully vaccinated, so I have nothing against vaccine.
Yeah, me too.
But I'm saying that there one group of persons who 100% get vaccinated. The another group who are the total anti-vax and the psychopath, not the normal part. And then there's a whole group of people in the middle now who is totally confused.
Yeah.
And both sides are pulling at them using the weapon of fear. Both parts. The weapon of fear has been used on both sides. For those who wanted to take the vaccine, boy, take it, boy, but then or those who say you shouldn't take it, about boy, you put a light bulb on your hand, you go off and certain parts of you will start to swell and you'll get sterile and a whole lot of nonsense.
Yeah.
But there's a group in the middle now that's saying, you know what, I just don't trust what either of you are saying. And therefore, I am not in that space where I believe I should get vaccinated.
Right.
And in that big group in the middle there, I think you need to speak to them, not through the lens of fear, but try and have a logical conversation, try and have a conversation that meets them where they are.
Right.
I'm not necessarily trying to say you're stupid for not taking the vaccine or you're stupid for taking the vaccine. But have that conversation. Even a simple thing, what is a safe zone and how do you explain that? Recently people started then embracing the idea that the vaccine is not a cure. It's just, it just prevents you from being hospitalized. People develop certain distrust only when you decide that children should get vaccine, all of a sudden there's this escalation in cases of kids dying or getting vaccine. That whole issue, how that information is disseminated, the conversation I want to have, and the fears I need for you to allay in me, if you don't address that from a logical standpoint and not from a fair standpoint, there's always going to be that big group of persons in the middle and they say, I don't trust nobody, so I don't want any vaccine.
And that explains the whole idea of vaccine hesitancy. That's why we have so many persons who are hesitant. Many persons are in that middle group.
Exactly, and because they're hesitant, it's not because they're the anti-vaxxers and that little fringe psycho group that talk about alien and Bill Gates and the rest of that. But it's just that big group of people who just do not trust. I just don't trust what I'm hearing here. I just don't trust what I'm hearing on this side. And I certainly am not going to be receptive to you if the first word that comes out your mouth is I had to be very stupid to take the vaccine or I had to be very stupid not to take the vaccine. That is not how that issue is supposed to be approached, in my humble opinion.
Of course. Looking at persons who may be in a present employment relationship and, the employer would have said, be vaccinated or else you have to submit your PCR test, be it weekly or every other week, and the case might be. So what options would you say are available to someone in that situation? I'm working in an establishment. I don't want to be vaccinated. I am working for minimum wage and so on. I can't afford to get PCR tests. I can't afford to do a PCR test. Do I have any third option?
Yeah, of course you have a third option. It might be a good option to find somewhere else to work. But that's an option.
Yeah, of course.
The point is that the employer has an obligation to provide a safe workplace for all of his employees. So unless you can say that does not address that particular issue, then I'm not so sure that there's much of a footing for the employee to necessarily say, well, I am somehow being prejudiced or I'm somehow there's some level of vindictiveness that's been meted out against me.
So
those two things have to be weighed in the balance.
So you would say that the obligation of the employer to provide a safe workplace for his employees, that would really trump the desire of an employee not to be vaccinated. That would be an overriding consideration.
Well, I say overriding, but I would say balancing, mitigating consideration. So not one overrides the other per se, but certainly they both must be taken into consideration in the employer now dealing with adequate directives to the employee that addresses both issues. Because at the same time, the employer can say, well, okay, if I just allow you to just come into the workplace unvaccinated and you put everyone at risk, then that is the other end of the other swing of the pendulum. That just it's not acceptable. That just can't work.
Yeah. Understood.
They just can't work. Then I might have the other employees now put him
in court. Yeah. Mr. Blaize, just before we close, I just want to raise the whole idea of exceptions. Because, there's a common saying that every rule there are exceptions. So, under the public health regulations, are there any stated exceptions for persons who may be unable to take the vaccine for particular reasons and so on? Does the law cater for that?
But certainly. Yeah, no, it does. I mean, but not in law, but in practice.
Yeah.
And I think persons who are unable due to some inherent medical problem that they may have, they are required to provide a doctor's certificate that says that.
Okay.
Because, I mean, it is documented there may be certain situations, as I say, comorbidities that may exist for which the vaccine may exacerbate the situation and probably even cause death.
Right.
Those persons have the option to be able to go to a doctor to get the relevant form and be exempt on that particular basis. So you can't force someone to take the vaccine if in taking the vaccine it's going to jeopardize their health. And they have the medical report that supports it.
Okay. Because Colin, even though as you raised that point as well, I think I recall as well when the exemptions to the public health regulations came up, I think they would have also indicated that pregnant women in certain stages of their pregnancy, right, they would not be eligible to take the vaccine until a certain time. So therefore, women in those cases who are pregnant and they are in that predicament whereby they cannot take the vaccine even though they may be willing. I don't think it was clearly stated. I think what I remember hearing was that they would have just been required to come with their medical exemption. I'm not sure if a negative PCR test was also included in the requirement for them to continue to work.
But I mean, what is taking place now is that employers are realizing that depending on exactly what the particular work portfolio is, it may not necessarily require the employee to actually be present at work.
Yes.
So a lot of work is actually been taking place at home. So instead of me checking your time 8 to 4, I now have to check your work output.
Yeah.
All right, but you can do it. Have people who have been 2 years now, they're home and they're working from home and producing.
Right.
So that they have that particular option as well. And I don't believe that it's an option that will be done away with even after COVID has gone.
I think so as well.
Yeah, that whole question of the hybrid workplace, I mean, maybe that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah.
But
certainly that is the future. Certainly the world pre-COVID is not going to be the same world post-COVID. And we have to start coming to terms with that.
Mr. Blaize, this has been a great discussion. Leonardo, you had anything you wanted to ask?
No, I think we would have touched on everything. He answered everything comprehensively. There are just a few follow-up and a very wonderful discussion. I think it was very informative, and I believe all of our listeners would certainly enjoy.
Mr. Blaize, it was a joy having you on.
Given by Mr. Blaize today.
Final words to you, sir. Final words. Any final words?
Thank you for having me as well. Final words. We need to get this country up and running. Yeah. We need to get business moving.
Agreed.
All right, and we need to do it in a safe environment. All right, so I just hope we're able to achieve that as early as we can. Because, like I said, I mean, and that's just the first phase. There's a lot of work again to be done even after that, and we have to brace ourselves for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So true.
Thank you all for having me.
Yeah, so this has really brought us to the end. A nice way to end off there. We need to get back up and running and reopen in a safe way.
Definitely.
For just the sake of humanity and health and those things. And I really want to echo those sentiments. So again, Mr. Blaize, it was a pleasure having you. And on behalf of myself and Mr. Dinoon, we really want to thank you for your time today. and for your wealth of knowledge, your experience, and your sense of humor at times. I must admit, it was quite intriguing to have you today as our guest, and we really, really want to thank you again.
This has been our first episode of the Legal Corner podcast series. We hope that you enjoy it, and we look forward to you tuning in to subsequent episodes. Bye for now.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Legal Corner podcast series. For more information, please visit us at our Facebook or Instagram pages or send your comments to thelegalcornerpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.